Lesson 9.1 starts out chapter 9, which is going to be all about graphing conic sections. I'll talk more about what that means in class and kind of frame the whole chapter for you. But in this video, we're going to just jump right into the lesson, which starts by reviewing some basics of distance and midpoint formulas. So we remember the Pythagorean theorem. So you can see that on the left here. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Pythagorean theorem, when we think about making this into a triangle, then we have side lengths A, B, and C. And we know that the length of A squared plus the length of B squared will equal the length of C squared. Well, we can think about the distance formula the same way. Think about if Pythagorean's theorem, we actually just solved for that length C, meaning the distance between these 2 points, that length C. We would just take the square root of both sides of the equation, and we would have that C equals the square root of A squared plus B squared. So the distance formula just gives us a way to represent the lengths of A and B in terms of the points, in terms of the x coordinates. So you can see that happening here. That length A is going to be the distance in the difference between the x coordinates. And that length B would be the difference in the y coordinates. And then otherwise it's the same formula. It'll find us that length of the hypotenuse, or in this case what we mean is the distance between the 2 points. The other formula we're going to review today is called the midpoint formula. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. It finds the point halfway between, or midway between, 2 points. As you would imagine, what we can do to find the distance halfway in between is just average the points. So if we want to find the distance between the x coordinates, we can just average the x coordinates. If we want to find the distance between the y coordinates, we can average the y coordinates. So the midpoint formula gives you a way to find a point. So the midpoint is going to be some coordinate pair x comma y once you do these averages. So let's do some examples. So part A says find the distance between each pair of points. So if I'm finding the distance, I'm using the distance formula, which says find the difference in the x coordinates, square that, and then sum that with the difference of the y coordinates, and square that. So I'll go ahead and label my points here. This I'll call my x1, y1. This I'll call my x2, y2. And then I'll just fill in for this formula. So it says distance equals the square root of x2, which is 7, minus x1 squared, plus y2, which is also 7, minus 2 squared. And then it's just a little bit of algebra. So that's the square root of what would be 4 squared plus 5 squared, which is the square root of 16 plus 25, which is the square root of 41. Part B says find the midpoint. We find the midpoint by averaging the x coordinates to get my x value. And the y coordinates, we average them as well to get the y coordinate of the midpoint. So x1 plus x2, referring to the same points there, we have 3 plus 7 over 2. And then the y coordinates, we have 2 plus 7 over 2. So that means we have the point, so 3 plus 7 would be 10 over 2, so that's 5. And then we have the point 9 halves. So that's our midpoint, 5 comma 9 halves, that coordinate pair. One more same way, distance between these 2 points. So we'll throw a little bit of difficulty in there by having to work with some radicals. The distance formula, again, we're going to use the same one. We know the distance we can find by taking the difference in the x coordinates squared plus the difference of the y coordinates squared. So I'll label these again. This will be my x1, y1. This will be x2, y2. And we just do some substituting in then. So we have distance equals the square root of negative root 2, so that's x2, minus root 2 squared, and then y2 minus y1 squared. So you have a little bit to remember with how to work with roots here. So negative root 2 minus root 2 would be negative 2 root 2. And then plus what would be negative 1 squared. So then when we square negative 2 root 2, we square the negative 2, so that would be 4. And then we square the root 2, so that would be 2. So what you really have under this radical is 4 times 2 plus, and then negative 1 squared is just 1. So we have the square root of 9, which is 3. So that's the distance between those 2 points. Do midpoint over here, part B. We find the midpoint by averaging the 2 coordinates. So we're going to sum together the x coordinates. So that's root 2 plus negative root 2. Average them, so divide by 2. And sum together the y coordinates and average them. So for our x coordinate, we're going to get 0 divided by 2, which we know is just 0. And for our y coordinate, we'll get 1/2. So the midpoint is 0/2. Example 3, it says find the missing coordinate using the distance formula. So the problem says the distance between the point 3, -5 and 7b is 5 units. And we're trying to find b. So let me first go ahead and write down the distance formula, since that's what we're using. So we have the difference in x coordinates, the difference in y coordinates. Let's plug in everything we're given. We're given that the distance is 5, so I'll plug in 5 for d. Labeling these points again, so we'll call 3, 5 are x1, y1, and then x2 for 7 and y2 for b. So we have x2, which is 7, minus x1 is 3, plus y2 is b, minus y1 is -5, and we square it. So we get 5 equals the square root of 4 squared, plus this would be b plus 5 squared. Okay, so moving right along then, we have 5 equals the square root of 16 plus b plus 5 squared. Okay, so we've simplified plenty in here. Let's go ahead and square both sides to get rid of this square root. Then we'll be moving along. So we get 25 equals 16 plus b plus 5 squared. Now we're just trying to get that b plus 5 squared by itself. So I'll subtract 16 from both sides. So I'll get 25 minus 16 is 9 equals b plus 5 squared. To get rid of the squared, we'll square root both sides. So I'll get plus or minus root 9 equals b plus 5. Then subtracting 5 from both sides, we get 5 plus or minus root 9 is b. Continue over here. That's -5 plus or minus 3 is b. So -5 plus 3 is -2, and -5 minus 3 is -8. So we have 2 options for b, -2 or -8, that would give us a distance of 5 between those 2 points. Okay, in class I'm going to give this like little mini quiz here, just to kind of see how you're doing with this stuff before you start your homework. In the video, I'm not going to solve these all start to finish. I'm just going to kind of show you how to set them up and let you know what the answers are. So for number 1, part A, we're just finding the distance between those 2 points. So I'll set the formula up and then show the answer. So the distance formula would be 6 minus 2 squared plus 1 plus 2 squared. And if you do all the work properly with that, you should get an answer of 5. Part B, same thing, distance formula. It's going to be 2 plus 6 squared plus 9 minus 7 squared. If you do all your math right with that and simplify your radical, you should get 2 root 17. Number 2 is asking you to, they're giving the distance like the last example we did, and then go back and find B. So for part A, you're going to have 10 equals the square root of -5 minus b squared plus 2 plus 6 squared. So that's how you set it up, and then the answer you should get is B is -11 and 1. And part B, same idea. You're given the distance is 13. You're solving for B. So it's B minus 13 squared plus 2 plus 3 squared. So you should get, if you do the algebra right there, B is 1 and 25. And then finally, 2 midpoint problems here. I'll write them down here. So for part A, you're averaging the midpoint, so it'll be 6 plus 4 over 2 and -7 plus a -3 over 2. So that's 5, -5. And then finally, part B, you do 8 plus -50 over 2, and then 9 plus -75 over 2. And the answer you should get is -21 and -33. So I know I didn't work those totally out in this video, but if you have trouble getting to the answer from the setup, you can just come see me for extra help.